This video is going to focus on how to actually convert from a rational exponent to a radical, or back and forth. Our previous video talked about what is actually a rational exponent, and those were the examples where if you had the square root of x, that was the same thing as 1/2. If you had the cubed root of x, that was x to the 1/3, or the fourth root of x, that was x to the 1/4. Remember, this symbol here is just the radical symbol, but when there's written with an x in there, we call that a square root because there's an implied 2 here that we typically don't write, but it is actually there every single time if nothing's there at all. So these are all the more simple examples where you always have a power of 1 in the numerator of that rational exponent. And that has to do with the fact that there's a power of 1 here and a power of x inside that radical. Right, so there's a power of 1 in each of these different insides of the radical. So what we need to do now is take a look at a different sort of example. So let's take this and say, well, let's stick with this cubed root of x idea. We know that if you had the cubed root of x, that would be the same thing as x to the 1/3. But what if I decided, well, actually I want to multiply 5 of them by each other. So the cubed root of x times another cubed root of x times a third times a fourth cubed root of x and another. So a total of 5 different cubed roots of x. Well, there's 5 of them being multiplied, so if I use my properties, I would say, well, that's really the same thing as the cube root of x all to the 5th power, right? Because there's 5 of them being multiplied. And from there, what we see is that if we repeated this down here, instead we had this x to the 1/3 and wrote it in the exponent form instead every single time, then what this would become is x to the 1/3 all to the 5th power. And now what we see is that you have a power of a power when it's written in exponent format. And we know that if you're writing things as a power to a power, that would be the same thing as saying that you have x to the 5/3 because you can multiply 5 times 1/3. And that would then be how you would simplify out this exponent. And so if we try to generalize this even further with this one specific example, if you have x to the 5/3, that would be x to the 1/3 times 5, right, because that's your power property, but that could also be x to the 5th all to the 1/3. So it doesn't matter which order you multiply, of course. 5 times 1/3 or 1/3 times 5 is both going to be 5/3. So usually what we see is that this is generalized to a power and a root example. And that would look something like this, where you have x to the p over r, where the p and the r stand for the power over root. And so then x to the power over root is equal to the rth root of x to the p, or the root and the power. So if we were to take a look at a couple quick examples, what you would see here is that you have 3 different ways that you can take a look at things. Where, first of all, you have x to the 4 over 9. So here we have a rational exponent. Here we have 8x, and so we have a set of parentheses around 8x, grouping it all together, which means it all has the power of 11/3. And now this final example, number 3, this one is written as a radical, so what I would want you to do is rewrite it as an exponent. So let's start with that first one. If we have x to the 4/9, that means that we have a power of 4 and a root of 9. So as we've set that up, it's pretty simple just to convert that. So you have the 9th root of x to the 4th, and that would be it. That's all you would have to do. For the second one, if you have 8x to the 11/3, that means you have a power of 11 and a root of 3. So then you'd have 8x inside your root, and that would be the 3rd root because that's the denominator there. But then you want to make sure you put 8x in parentheses for you when you do the 11th power, because then, again, everything gets that 11/3. So 8x, both parts, gets that power of 11. For the third example, you have a radical. You're converting it into an exponent. So you have 200y, which all has that power of 5 on the inside of that radical. So the power would be 5. The root would be 13. So all you would have to write is 5 over 13 as your exponent. So here are your ways that you can convert a rational exponent into a radical or vice versa.